You know that moment when you're in the middle of something at work and suddenly you realize that you don't even remember starting that task? Or how about when you lock your front door, drive all the way to work, and then you panic because you don't remember if you actually locked it? Sure, we've all been there. And that, my friends, is autopilot. And it actually got me thinking, if we do little things every day without realizing it, what else are we actually doing in autopilot? And could some of those things actually translate to unsafe tasks at work? I don't know, maybe. I'm Monica, and I'm here with my co host, Scott, and we are joined by two amazing guests, Mike Mandel and Chris Thompson. They are internationally known hypnosis trainers, co founders of the Mike Mandel Hypnosis Academy, and they're experts in how subconscious patterns shape real world behavior. They teach everybody from therapists to corporate leaders on how the mind really works and how to influence that ethically. And on today's episode, we're going to be digging into the subconscious side of safety, the hidden patterns, shortcuts, mental scripts that drive behavior more than rules ever do. So, Mike, Chris, it is truly an honor to have you both here. How are you doing, especially coming off of that 5-day training you just wrapped up in Toronto?
Oh, gee. Well, today is my first day back. I discovered that I used to need 2 days to recover. But because there's a huge prep time too of about 30 to 40 textbooks I power read the week before. So it's 2 weeks of intensity, and at 72, it's not as easy as it used to be, but I need 3 full days to recover. And today is day 4. So
yeah.
Wow.
I don't bother Mike, and I let him have his Saturday, Sunday, Monday to relax. And it is a good metaphor that you use, Mike. When we're teaching, we're like running the engine at 7,000 RPM all day, all week long, and then we put it into idle and kind of rebuild. So we're back, we're fresh, we're ready for you guys to talk about some fun topics.
Fantastic.
Yeah, Scott, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing okay. I'm totally pumped by spending this hour, and you had me buffaloed when the title came up and told me to be ready, and I didn't quite know how to be ready, but here I am. And Trevor, you are looking and sounding just a bit different these days. So I had one other colleague that was joining me, and now we have tossed him and we have replaced him with you. Is that what we're saying? Is that what we're all about, Monica?
Well, as the executive producer, I did make the executive decision that I think we need a little prettier of a face for the podcast. So I am
absolutely
in his place.
That's so good. So at least I have a colleague to go forward with, and so I'm looking forward to it. We're going to miss Trevor, but I'm really, really looking forward to you and what your perspective is on some of these subjects that we're going to discuss.
I mean, no pressure, but I'll do my best.
Pressure.
And I don't know if you had a chance to listen to their podcast. It's called The Brain Software, but I actually just listened to the most recent episode where they talked about the strategy and science of creating happiness and the conscious and unconscious side of it, which is actually a great segue into the first question. So, Chris, Mike, in your humble opinion, why is it that people actually take shortcuts when they know better? Is it habit, routine, or is it more of a conscious bad choice?
Oh, great question. I can tell you exactly why. It goes back to our utilization of glucose and oxygen as humans. Back in the days when we lived in caves and fought saber-toothed tigers and lived day to day or moment by moment, one of the worst things we could do would be expend undue energy. Because if we do, we may not have sufficient energy to get the next meal. And so we became wonderful at not using energy, which is why it is much easier to lie on the couch than it is to get up and run a marathon. But in all seriousness, that is the case. I say to people who are swimmers and tell me they've never lost weight, and they say that's because you're swimming. Because in order to swim efficiently, you have to be buoyant. And to be buoyant, you have to hold more fat. And the brain wants you to make swimming as easy as possible, so you'll retain fat instead of burning it up when you swim. That way it uses less energy when you swim. And everything is gearing down to energy depletion and restoration. So on that note, it's way, way easier to create shortcuts and to systematically and continuously use them. Once we do, the neural pathway gets burned in, and it's what we will continue to default to.
I think the same thing is true with pretty much everything we do, right, Mike? When we were looking at some of these topics, we thought, well, the reason why it's called a shortcut or that it's unconscious is that we do it without thinking. We do all of these things. We talk without thinking. Imagine if we had to plan every single word and sentence structure that we were going to utter over a podcast like this. The brain is a big organ. It runs and it requires a lot of energy. If we had to use it for every single musculature movement, every single word that we put out, every single thing that we had to plan, we'd never get anything done. We'd probably have to eat 10 times as much food. So yeah, the brain and pretty much all human activity is based around unconscious patterns.
So for you guys, right? So I think this is very interesting because I've watched this in action, right, my entire career. So what you're saying is we're basically built, instead of going A, B, C, D, we want to go A to D, right?
We just want to go to D.
Yeah, we just want to go to D
as
fast as we can, as most efficient as we possibly can.
Yes. And in order to be efficient, we have to be in the best possible state to do that. And we have different states, different levels of integration we go through during the day. And we're running through different ultradian patterns, about 90 to 120 minutes, where our brains cycle through rest cycles and energy cycles. And one of the best gifts we can give ourselves is to recognize our own rhythmic states. We know when we're energized. We know when we're not. For instance, today, Scott, it's 1:12 here in Toronto. I guess probably the same time where you are. But the interesting thing is, I tend to, Chris will tell you, fall asleep at 2 p.m. And in Chinese medicine, if you take the time you go to bed, if you do it habitually, and the time you awaken, so for me, that's 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. So there's an 8-hour stretch. I don't sleep that whole time. But if you divide that in half, then getting 2 a.m. Now, if you flip it by 12 hours, that's the time your energy will tank the most. So I know my energy would tank at 2 o'clock. So in preparation for that, I took a power nap for half an hour before this meeting to ensure that my energy will be strong. So we tend to learn to work with our systems and work with our internal rhythms to work more efficiently that way, working smarter, not harder.
Right. Recognize the patterns and hack them.
Yeah.
So saying that, right? So you've got an employee that's working, 8 to 10 hours a day. How do they hack that system? Because they can't take a power nap, right? It will be a little frosted if they did that.
Yeah. Well, the answer is what I discovered at my cabin this summer. We have a 600 square foot cabin. I lived there 3 months of the year up northern Ontario, and just very austere. But because of the surroundings for my workout, which is pretty intense, I love to use a pull-up bar as well. Well, there isn't one up there, and there's no way of setting it up without ripping the walls down or something. Sure, and I started to get irritated about the things I couldn't do up there. There was there's no stationary cycle. There's not this, there's not this. And I started saying, well, okay, I can't do any of that. What can I do really well still? And for people who don't have that cyclic control over their lives, especially people who, God forbid, are in shift work, you can't do that. So you have to find, what can I do really well that will compensate for that? And I got home and I hadn't lost any fitness or anything. So I evidently found ways around it. It's the same with our states through the day.
Yeah, I think if you're looking at people who are working and doing shift work, they do take breaks. So if people are noticing that they're getting particularly, let's say, fatigued, it's probably important to structure breaks, even if it's just a 15-minute break or whatever timing people have. You can just sit and chill and go into self-hypnotic trance if you want to for 5 minutes and get a recharge, or 10 minutes or whatever the case may be. So if people learn how to do that, I do that. I don't do that while I'm driving, but a lot of the times if I am driving middle of the day where I would normally be tired, how many times have you caught yourself driving behind the wheel, hopefully behind the wheel, and just go, oh, I'm kind of having one of these waves of fatigue, right? Sometimes you just need to recognize that it's time to pull over and just rest for a little while before you get back on the road, because it's a safety issue if you don't have the energy.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. I left one company, right, big, large company, and then I went to another in pharmaceuticals, and I literally had to build in my day by direction an hour. Right, an hour a day, and they really, the company really wanted you to go over to the gym and walk on the treadmill, or go outside and walk, or just do something different, right, than you were doing to rest yourself, right? And I did find that in those 8, 9, 10 hours that I would work normally during the day, I was a lot more efficient by taking that hour out of my day and dedicating that to rest, right? Rest or doing something different than what I would normally do. sticking at the desktop, right, and keep on going, trudging through. So I think that's a very interesting perspective. Yeah, really is.
It's that metaphor, Scott. The old woodsmith and the young lumberjack, and they have a contest who can cut the most trees down, and the old guy's taking all these breaks, and the young guy's just going like crazy. At the end of the day, the old guy's cut down more trees. And he said, "But you took all those breaks." He said, "That's when I was sharpening the axe." And that's what the breaks do for us. There's a tendency to say, "Oh, I can't take a break. I'm too busy." But the break enables us to do the busy work better, even if it is just 5 or 10 minutes.
Do you find when you're talking about, and you're doing this on a daily basis, right? Talking to organizations, do you find a barrier when you're talking to senior leaders saying, "I want your people to take time out for breaks"? And do you see the flags go up? But worse than that,
we recommend gambling. A real break. Just kidding.
Heading down to the casino down the street, and
or on your phone.
Or you're on your phone now. Yeah.
I've heard. What's your answer to that, Chris?
I think that I have many decades in the many decades is an exaggeration, a couple of decades in the corporate world before we left it all behind to do this, teaching people hypnosis and how to live an awesome life from the comfort of my own home, which I love. But I think that there is a tendency to think that working harder is working smarter. And that people would wear as a badge of honor, right? The idea that they don't sleep. I only get 4 hours of sleep a night. Like it's something to be freaking proud of. And the reality is, just like getting not enough sleep is stupid and bad for you. Constantly just trying to work yourself down to the bone and having a manager that thinks that you need to because he does and he imposes that will upon his staff. You should all believe the same thing I do. This leads to loss of rapport with the people you're working with, less productive time because now just think of it like those are the two things it really leads to. But think of a parenting situation. If you're raising kids and you tell the child, let's say, you can't eat cookies. Cookies are bad for you. You're not allowed cookies. What does Johnny do when he goes over to his friend Bobby's house and Bobby's mom buys cookies? He eats them all, right? So I think people, they rebel, and whether they rebel in childhood with their parents or in school with their teachers, and then the same thing is going to happen in the corporate world where they're on a manufacturing line or whatever the case may be of their job, and their boss is kind of, what's the term we use for this in the technical sense, Mike? Yeah, I was going to say. Close enough. So if you actually comes to one of the main points that we really wanted to make sure we communicated with you guys here is that the big picture stuff, the power of rapport is so important when in the workforce. So if you're a leader and you're working with people, you need to be respected, not liked as if you're their best friend, but you have to be in rapport. Have you ever had a teacher who was just a phenomenal teacher? You didn't think he was your buddy, but you went, wow, this guy's awesome, or this woman is awesome, taught me chemistry or calculus or physics or whatever the case may be. You just learned something and you so enjoyed the teaching environment that you looked up to that person and you were in rapport. And in much the same way, I think leaders need to be in rapport with the people that they work for, or work with. They are kind of working for. I'm working in support of you who's on the production line, let's say, right? Rapport is absolutely critical skill. And if you communicate that you value that person's time, you value their energy and their efficiency, and you want to support them in any way you can, you are going to promote that kind of healthy lifestyle, getting the appropriate amount of sleep, getting good quality rest, taking that 15 to 30-minute rest if necessary, recharging. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the modern term for that is hustle culture, which I think is way too glorified. I love my 9 hours of sleep.
Yeah.
But on the topic of leaders, do you think that leaders consciously or subconsciously influence behavior, whether it be safer decisions or even the ethics of it? Is there any sort of influence you think?
Yeah, Mike, I'm going to turn this to you. I think we are all doing hypnotic behaviors all the time without necessarily realizing it. Most people are influencing other people without recognizing that they're doing it usually in a bad way, like I said. So let's say being a bad example, not being in rapport, creating those kinds of environments where people are likely to rebel in some way or take shortcuts because they just don't want to do it the way they've been told to. They don't feel in rapport. They don't have an identity of, I'm a safety-minded person. I'm a corporate contributor. I'm a team member. They're in it for themselves because the environment was set up that way. Mike, maybe you can talk more about that.
Well, I'm thinking right away, Chris, of, God forbid, Edward the Confessor, because King of England, 1000 AD, he was known for having something called the royal touch. And back then they believed that kings and queens in Europe were put there by divine will. So you had to believe them and trust them and so on. Lately, that's not been understood or believed in quite so much. In the case, certainly, of Andrew, formerly known as Prince. But if you think of these things, if someone is in a position of authority or power or perceived to be important, you have something called prestige kicking in. And Edward the Confessor used to have one day a year when people who had scrofula, the king's evil, a form of skin tuberculosis, they would come into the king, which would be about as easy as getting to see the Pope. And he'd lay his hands on them. And often, because of his prestige, the problem would disappear. The health problem would vanish. Now, there's layers of rapport happening all the time. My medical doctor told me that how many people ask him for financial advice. Should they buy gold? He's a medical doctor, but he's perceived as having prestige. And when we're in a position of authority, when you combine prestige with rapport, which values the other person, and rapport is nothing more or less than seeming to be sharing the same model of the world. We like people who seem to be similar to us. They feel trustworthy and nice, and people who seem to care about us. When we have prestige and rapport together, our power of influence is hypnotic.
So it's really it's about just to turn this all into like the right direction for us all here. You can not know that you're doing a crappy job of having a hypnotic effect on people, or you can turn it around. You can learn how to influence people ethically in a useful way, like Mike just described with being a king and having the prestige. And then either way, you still want that to become the new default autopilot, unconscious pattern that you're running. You're just naturally in rapport with people, naturally a good communicator, and you don't have to think about it. And that influences them in the right way.
Yeah, I was combining as I was listening. Boy, this subject is a mile wide and it's a mile deep, isn't it? Because I think, you go all the way back, right, to the first conversation that we had. I can remember the days where I stayed until the senior leader left the office, so I would go behind him. So he would, quote, know that I was really following what his influence was, right? He had no clue. He absolutely had no clue that I was staying, right? But I looked good to myself. I was willing to do that. Now you kind of translate that over to what we're talking about now. I think whether a leader knows it or not, they have significant influence in a positive or a negative way, right, over the organizations that they lead. And it's I'm a big reader of folks like John Maxwell, right? And he really kind of tells the message that, well, leadership is influence, right? However, there's several paths, right, of how you influence an organization, and you have a choice, right? Am I going to do this in a very positive way? Am I going to do this in a very negative way? But many times, I don't even think a leader recognizes that he may be influenced in a very negative way.
Right.
Now, let's talk about that, because that's fascinating. One of the things I learned from one of my teachers, Dr. John Grinder, was something called the awesome commander problem. And it came to light a number of years ago that people in the airline industry, because the captain of the plane has so much prestige, because he's the commander of an aircraft, a 747 or 777 now, he's got a first officer, and he's got a flight engineer too a lot of the time. But he's perceived as so perfect, he's the awesome commander, that even when he made mistakes, errors that could endanger the aircraft, they would not say anything.
Even if they saw them.
Even if they saw it. Because they shouldn't speak up. So that's the kind of influence you could have. So how do they get around it? The solution was they institutionalized it. And on any given flight, the commander would make 3 distinct mistakes, and their job was to look for them and catch them. So there's ways you can get around this stuff.
Yeah, and I think when we talked about this, there's a sense that a manager or leader could establish that in a culture. And we want to challenge people listening to think about how can you gamify the idea of making mistakes on purpose so that it's almost like a challenge for the people on the team to point them out in a fun way, like they're winning a competition in a sense, right? And if that could train people unconsciously. See, we all learn by repetition. And if we are not afraid to do something and then we get to do it enough, it just becomes the new autopilot. And all of a sudden it's, oh, haha, I see the mistake here. Let's fix this. And all of a sudden, like Mike said, it's institutionalized. And now people aren't uncomfortable pointing out things that need to be improved.
Right. And that does tie into, I guess, if these everyday habits turn into autopilot, that would surely affect safety because you're skipping those important steps. And Scott, I'm sure you've seen a million examples of this in your EHS experience.
Well, I have. I mean, I think, I published a book last year, and it was because I spend way too much time on LinkedIn now, right, than I should. And I'm seeing a lot of consultants trying to lead a path that says, well, this is the true way to safety success, or it's this way, right? And I see these paths kind of wandering about, right, without an author that I know's kind of walked the ditch, right? So a lot of people are making very advanced choices for how we should act that has never been to the front line of an organization to see how work is actually done, right? So when we're talking about decision making, when we're talking about behaviors, I teach a webinar on, what's the problem with safety 2? Well, safety 1 is a problem with safety 2, right? So, safety 1, how I started my career of risk mitigation, of finding things wrong in the environment, fixing those things, right? And then you slide over to safety 2 and says, boy, it's about learning, right? It's about how things can go right. It's about looking at things differently. It's about understanding without blame, how we fix things in a sustainable fashion. And I look at all of the talk going, why wouldn't you do both? Right? Why wouldn't you do both of those things? So I look at it totally as a practitioner. My job first is to take risk out of the work environment and take as much out as I possibly can, knowing that I'm never going to take as much out as I need to, right? So there's two sides of that I'm always working on. And when I think about it, well, why do people make the decisions that they do? Well, some of it they don't know, right? So some of it, I mean, it's really kind of funny that we're having this conversation. I did a webinar last night, late last night, with an airline company out of Malaysia, and it's some of the very same things that we've already talked about. It's very hierarchical. We didn't talk about senior leaders in the company. And they asked me, says, what could we do? I said, just doing a better job of near miss notifications, of observations that everyone sees in the organization would help you immensely. And there was a stare. There was a blank stare as I was saying those words, because it's not the way that they work, right? But it should be the way that they work. Right? Because there's just tremendous benefit of all of us learning together, right? And if we can start to identify those things together, we can start to build controls into the work system. So I think this is fascinating talk, because I don't say it as well as Chris or Mike, but I absolutely agree that, yep, these are solutions to these resident problems.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think the first step to prevention is actually awareness. So, Chris, Mike, do you guys have any practical tips or insights into how someone can become more aware of these habits?
You want to
go on, one of the things, go ahead, Chris, go ahead. I'll follow.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say that one of the problems people make is whenever they're attempting to lead others in a specific direction, they tend to speak in nominalizations. Which are essentially management speak. Nominalizations are using nouns that you cannot put in a wheelbarrow. So we all know that we need a new understanding. And as we get this kind of recognition, and this is all nominalizations, it has no real content beyond what their personal experience and beliefs and so on, reality tunnels put on it. We need a greater specificity as to what is required. And that specificity in our terms goes to VAK. It's what will you see? What will you hear? What will you feel when it's correct? We're being so specific that we're giving something to focus on instead of just vague generalizations.
Right. And that actually fits in so nicely within the field of NLP, or neuro-linguistic programming, which I really got interested in because of watching Mike do a keynote back in 1993. That's what got me all hooked on this. But this all comes from NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, the idea of what we call the meta model. So that is, if someone's doing, politicians do this all the time, but not with any rapport. Somebody asks you a hard question. Well, we've considered all of the ways that the economy needs to be transformed so that people can come together in the right sort of way, and we have the support of all of the people and can manifest the
Stop!
It's like, shut up, because you're saying absolutely nothing. Now, that can be very hypnotic when you have rapport as well, or otherwise it can be a massive rapport breaker. But when someone's communicating in that way that isn't very meaningful, we have to start using language to clarify language, and that's what the meta model does. So you can simply use some phrases like, how specifically can we X, or what specifically, usually the word specifically is a nice one to throw in there. How will we know when that has happened? You can ask clarifying questions to get to the actual deep structure of the meaning. So if somebody wants you to show up 10 minutes early to this particular production line and check that these things are I don't know, set up correctly or calibrated or whatever the heck is going on in the world of operations, we have to be very specific and not just say it's important to consider the ramifications of a loose safety framework such that the safety of all of our teammates is maintained in an ecological. What the hell does that even mean, right?
Fair.
No, I don't disagree with that at all. I think we've adapted right to that type of communication because we live in this Google culture, and now we're living in a Chat GPT culture because I don't have to be specific because I know they're going to turn around and go Chat GPT this, or they're going to Google for a better answer or a deeper answer. I've even noticed that I write like that, right? Is that we don't get too specific because you isolate, right, the message of what that person should feel or should see. I kind of want to go back. So Mike, you mentioned what we see, what we hear. What was that other one?
What we feel.
And what we feel. This is how we process information. Yes, we have visual sense, auditory, and kinesthetic. And kinesthetic has the subgroups of olfactory, sense of smell, and gustatory, sense of taste. And we process the world through all of those, whatever the world is, because we do not apprehend it directly, except through the sense of smell, which is the only sense that goes into the limbic system of the brain. Everything else goes through a series of transforms, F1, F2, etc. So when I look at the screen in front of me, I'm not seeing the screen. I'm seeing an inverted image from ocular vision in my occiput in the back of my head, and my brain is projecting it as though it's out there. So those are how we look at everything, and see everything and feel everything. And when we help people unpack their experiences, these are called modalities. When we start to unpack these modalities, we get a greater insight to what they're actually processing.
Wow.
Which leads us to the two magic questions, the Jedi questions. Yeah. Whenever somebody says something in any setting, it might be controversial, it might be interesting. The first question is, how did you come to believe that? So they will give you now their epistemology. And then the second question is, how do you know it's true? I'm looking for how they're representing it in their brain to tell me whether or not it's real, whether I'm dealing with somebody with a phobia or listening to a speech and asking for clarification. How did you come to believe that? And how do you know it's true? What's your evidence criteria that this is true? Well, I just thought it, and then you start to break this down and we can start inserting different information, but everything is going to be VAK in the long run. Chris.
Yeah, and those are the two belief busting questions or belief challenging questions that we can use in, I was going to say almost any conversation, but any conversation where, let's say, what's being decided upon is fundamentally driven by some belief that seems to be out there. We can ask those questions to unpack the belief, find out, is the belief something that's still logical? Does it make sense? Is it correct? How did we come to believe that? And how do we know it's true? And that might lead you to reevaluate maybe how processes are done, or what documentation you should be following, or who should be doing something. Should this be someone, this person here's job, or should it be someone else's job? And these can be really, really useful.
Yeah, I think, because my head goes directly to, well, what I see, what I hear, those seem to be the easier ones, right? What I feel, right? That kind of tells me it's in my gut, right? I'm feeling this way. How do you unpack that?
Well, I'll give you an example. Years ago, I was at Humber College in Toronto, and the student who brought me in to do a hypnosis demonstration said, "Can you do anything about dyslexia?" And I said, what do you mean? She said, well, I'm dyslexic. I said, how do you know? And she said, my doctor said I am. And I said, what is the evidence? And she said, well, I can't spell. And so I said, spell a word like renowned. And she goes, R-E, what was it? And just gets lost instantly. I said, what you're doing, she's looking down and to the right. That axis is kinesthetic, the feeling sense. She's trying to spell by feelings. That doesn't work. Watch kids doing spelling bees. As they're spelling words, they're looking up, back and forth. Visual. They're firing the occiput, the sight center. So I said, okay, I'm going to write in a piece of paper, A-L-B-U. And this is the classic way of doing it. I held it up so she had to look over to the side. I said, can you see it? She went, yeah. I said, say it. She went, A-L-B-U. And I said, that's very good. And it kept doing this. Anyway, we broke it into sections. And I said, now put it all together. She looks down and to the right. And I said, no, it's up here. Now she's using her brain properly and goes, A-L-B-U-B-Q-U-E. I said, congratulations, you've just spelled Albuquerque. And it's like, what? We break it into sections. She was told she was dyslexic, so kept spelling by feelings. You must apply the right remedy to the job. What's the old line, Scott? I continued to apply the correct solution, which did not work despite being the correct solution.
That's exactly right.
So running the brain more effectively, right? Instead of relying on that kinesthetic, that feeling sense of, does it feel like it's the right spelling? Actually using the visual sense instead. Now, obviously, kinesthetic can be emotions that we feel, but it can also be tactile stuff. So if you're doing a job that requires physicality, you'll know, like if somebody was lifting a heavy weight of some sort, whether it be in the gym or moving something around a warehouse, how do they know that they're doing it correctly? They'll be able to tell you, well, I can feel that I have tension here, but I'll know it's wrong when I feel pain in my lower back or whatever the case may be. And that, I don't know if you guys have a lot of clients that deal with those kinds of things and people get injured by moving things around, but that's where feeling can come in as well. It doesn't have to be an emotion.
Well, I think it's a big important part of being a practitioner, right? Because we are trained to look for things, to listen for things, to hear things, right? But this whole idea of feeling, and we run into that head on every single day with people on the front line. They don't want to do something, or they don't feel right that seems safe, but they may go forward with that direction, and they may be injured. But I try to unpack that, right? I try to ask leading questions. Well, why do you feel that way, right? What's one barrier that you think you can overcome, right, to do that job correctly, right? So honestly, I guess, and I'm not as trained as what you're demonstrating today, but right relationship building, asking the right questions is a real important part of being able to unpack what they're feeling at the time. Is there more to that? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. You just said
you're
something that I know Mike and I have just calibrated on when you said, why do you feel that way? There's a key, I think there's a really key concept we want to make sure we explain. Go ahead, Mike.
No, you go ahead. I have a different thing to say.
Oh, all right. Oh, okay. Cool. So then we've got a double whammy. All right. So the first thing that I learned this, man, back in 1993, Mike, when you were doing your first brain software keynote lecture at Carleton University, Porter Hall, and I was so lucky to be there. And you taught a lot about this. There's this concept of present state, which is where people are when they are typically stuck. Usually we describe this for stuck states. So if people are saying like, well, I'm depressed, or I'm tired, I'm not in a good mood, that they're describing their current state, which is not where they want to be. And then where people want to be, we call that the target state. And in order to transform the present state into the target state, we need to focus the right resources there. We need to know what we actually want. And we can guide people there by asking effective questions. Usually the way to do this is to turn a stuck state question like, why am I feeling this bad way, into a how question or a what question. I like how questions. How can I, whatever the case may be, such that I feel the way I want to feel? Now, in order to do that, you have to ask the magic question, which starts like this. What do you want to have happen? Or just simply, what do you want? Yeah. People have to be able to identify what they want. Well, I feel, they'll usually tell you what they don't want. So they'll unpack, well, I don't want to feel so unmotivated to show up at work. Okay, wonderful. What do you want instead of that? Well, they'll repeat themselves and they'll tell you what they don't want again. And at which point we'll usually joke with them and say, well, the list of things that you don't want is infinite. You don't want, I like how Mike says this, you don't want to build bonfires in your bedroom. You don't want to mine for tin on the planet Jupiter. And I like to add in, and you don't want a dozen root canals, even if they are free and performed by Elon Musk himself. So the things you don't want is infinite. You have to find out what people do want and then ask them how questions in order to aim them at that target state.
Yes. Who goes to the grocery store with their shopping list of everything they're not going to buy?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That actually makes me think of the sheep mentality at work, where I'm sure we've all come across somebody like this, where they're usually a happy person, but they go to work and all their coworkers around them are miserable. Then they turn miserable as well. So I guess, how do you snap yourself out of that if it's something that you have to ask yourself? Because if you're in that misery loves company, and you're not going to want to snap out of it. So what would you do?
Mike, you should answer that. And I know you had something else you were going to say as well. Maybe you'll find a clever way to blend them together.
Well, let's see. Let's go back to what I was going to say. Scott, when you were explaining about, dealing with people in the workplace and so on, one of the keys with the visual, auditory, and kinesthetic systems is people look up, back and forth when they're accessing the visual sense. They go on a level plane back and forth when they're accessing the auditory sense. These are all things hardwired in the brain. They look down and to the right, a right-handed person, when it's feelings, but also the predicates of their speech give it away. And the different predicates of speech, people all have one preferred system. 60% of Western society prefers the visual sense. The second largest is kinesthetic, or feelings. A lot of athletes are kinesthetic. They're very in touch with their bodies. And the smallest group is auditory, like me. They process the world by sound, by words, and so on. So when you're talking to someone, the key is to listen for the predicates, to influence them. Years ago, my agent was trying to get me to go to Australia in a certain month. And my wife was saying, who speaks in visual terms, can't you see? It's not a bright idea now. And my agent is coming back with, well, I just feel it's a solid thing for him to make a presence. And she's talking kinesthetic. And listen to the two of them back and forth. They couldn't even communicate. Listen for what the person's saying, the feeling sense, and answer them in feeling terms. I want you to grasp this, because you'll find it's really solid if you feel it, talking feeling terms to them, and they'll listen. Hit the nail on the head. Get a grip on it.
Speak to them in their language that they understand.
Dialect, yeah.
Now, Monica, you had a question. Just remind me. I now already forgotten.
It was more around the sheep mentality, and if you're working in this negative environment, how do you snap out of it?
Right. And so, Mike, I think we can talk about this, because obviously, if people they form this group trance, and in fact, it really makes me think about stage hypnosis shows that you'd done for decades, where they go into a bit of a group trance, the volunteers on stage. So we would typically say that the show can progress at the rate of the best subject as restricted by the worst subject. And
right.
We tend to send the bad volunteers back into the audience. And I think it's kind of the same mentality in a workplace environment, where if a couple of people are in a bad mood and then people join that, it becomes magnetic. And we're in this bad state. Now, how can you break through that? Well, the concept of a pattern interrupt can be useful, but I think more so is the concept of just modeling the state that you do want others to be in. So if you're a leader, if you're a manager of some kind, you've got to get good at controlling your own state and showing up in the state that you want others to be in. So if you smile and you ask people good quality questions, we start our Monday morning meetings in our company, and we start with, what was a win for you last week? Just anything. I don't care if it's business related or I went and got to see my kids at university on Sunday, and my wife and I drove to Kingston, and we hung out with our kids for the day, and it was awesome, super fun. Get people talking about things that are awesome. One of our team members this Monday morning, he said, I got in Argentina, he got to go see the band Oasis on the weekend, and he just lit up. And when people get to talk about things that they enjoy, they show up, and this completely pulls them out of their bad state and gets them in a good state. So get really good at asking questions that drive people into these awesome states, and then just amplifying those.
Yeah, and changing states on purpose. Years ago, I had a thing for Yamaha in Niagara, or Jordan Station near Niagara. And it was in a beautiful setting. I showed up right from an event in Toronto, and they were hammered. They're standing around the bar, and everybody's drinking and laughing. And I went, oh, shoot. It's just going to be hard. No one's going to pay any attention to a guy with a freaking flip chart and some markers here, 10 feet. Not at all. I went out in the hall. I went, I'm in a really bad state having seen that. So I shook it off. If you move your physical body, you change state right away. I changed my breathing slow and deep. And I thought, I'm going 30 seconds later, I'm going to go back in and look at that room with different eyes. And I walked in and looked around in this different state. And I realized they weren't drunk. Some of them were drinking ginger ale. They were happy. And it was one of the best keynotes and trainings I did because I wasn't carrying the baggage of thinking, oh, they're going to be a problem. Because if I thought that, I would have presented that back to them. And
your perceptual filter changed.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's actually called the confirmation bias. If you have a thought, you're going to search out things to confirm that thought.
It is. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. We'll delete information of the contrary because we're getting 3 to 20 million bits a second at any given moment. Robert Anton Wilson called it your reality tunnel. We put together all of our confirmation biases and we get one reality tunnel. And this is what we believe, even if it's wrong.
But to add to that, and again, right, my perspective is that leaders have an opportunity to lead differently, right? And happiness in the workplace, it's not exclusive for the leader to mandate that we're going to be happy, right? But that person's actions certainly elevate the possibility that that could happen. And I'll give you a story that I was a junior leader, right, in my first facility. But I came from an environment, my family environment, where relationships were important, where my ability to get to the front line was mandated by my grandmother because she worked the front line in a manufacturing facility with a message that said, you better take care of people like me, right? So one of the first things that I did, I would get with these work crews right on the front line, and they weren't all happy, but I would ask questions. I said, well, tell me about your life, right? Tell me about your family. Oh, your son plays Little League ball. I would show up at a ball game, right? I didn't say anything. I just showed up at a ball game, and they would go back to work and they would talk about it, right? I would show up at a piano recital, even those are not my favorite, right? But they would come back and they would talk about it. And those small things, right, created a different behavior at work than the other leaders could ever achieve, right? Because they were looking for somebody that would step out. Right. So my conversations changed. My relationships changed simply by doing small things. Right. And you could see, Mike and Chris, literally, you could see joy, right, with those teams when I engaged with them rather than some of the other leaders that were only forcing down mandates. Right. Yeah. So I think as leaders, we have to step out, right, a little differently than normally we do.
I think you're raising a really interesting point here that the quality of a leader, the qualities that a leader needs to have or a manager are different than the qualities of somebody on a production line or doing somebody on whatever the case may be, even in sales. How many times have you seen people get promoted because they performed really well at a job at this level A, let's say. So they get promoted to level B, and now they're a people manager. Maybe it's a sales manager, maybe it's a production manager, something like that. But it's a totally different skill set, isn't it?
Totally.
And just because somebody performs really well at the level they were at doesn't mean that they have the skill to do the next thing. And I actually think this makes so much sense. We have a lot of hypnotherapists in our business who are really good at helping people with the skill, the tool of hypnosis or neurolinguistic programming or life coaching, whatever the skill is. It's a totally different skill to be an entrepreneur and run your own business and need to learn how to do the marketing and the client attraction and all that kind of stuff, right? All the different things. And so it's much the same way. Just because you're good at one thing doesn't make you automatically good for the other. So I think if you're
this is a Peter principle.
Yeah.
Chris. Peter principle. Everybody tends to rise in an organization to the level of their own incompetency and then stops and stays there forever.
Bingo. So if you're a hiring manager and you're putting people in these positions where they're managing people, at least make sure that they show an interest in the kinds of skills that you just described, Scott, rather than just being really good at the thing that their people do. You can be excellent at the thing that your people are doing and totally suck at communication, not show any interest. The absolute best thing you can do to inspire them is have them respect you, like we talked about with prestige and stuff like that, but also show an interest in them, be in rapport with them and share their interests.
Yep. I think it's a well-known fact that people don't leave a bad job because of the job. They usually leave because of bad leadership.
Yeah,
so
that's a really good point.
Yeah, we need to speak to you about that, Chris.
Yeah.
I've been wondering how I could open that. So.
Oh, that's hilarious. Yeah. Oh man, we have an ongoing joke in our company where we fire each other for hilarious things, but then immediately hire each other back. So I think that's Mike's way of saying you're fired, and I go, well, I just hired myself back. Ha, I can do that. I'm the CEO. Yeah, that is such a good point. That is such a good point. That it is about people first. If you put people first and you build relationships with them and you create the right kind of performance states so that they want to do a good job, that those become the automatic to get back to what we started with, right? The unconscious autopilot habits. You want them in the right kinds of habits.
Right. So I think as like the main takeaway, just to wrap everything up, whether you're top down or you're in the mines, I think the biggest takeaway is you just need to be aware of your behaviors and how it all trickles down and circles back to each other. So do you have a simple trick that everyone could take away and maybe try today to improve this?
Yeah, Mike, do you want to a couple of things we can do here, either getting in the zone, I think is a really important skill we teach everyone to do. We could also talk about some quick linguistic things that we have in our notes.
Which getting in the zone? Are you talking about the getting in the zone one?
Well, no, I mean, just a general idea of how do you get in the zone to be a people person? So I think just the idea of John Grinder's chain of excellence, the idea that your performance is going to be dictated by the state that you're in. Your state is going to be dictated by your physiology, which is how you stand, how you move, et cetera. And then your physiology is going to be affected at the highest level by your breathing. So breathing the right way and getting yourself in that zone, even just repeating some positive affirmations. Mike taught this to me years ago. We call it ego state shopping. To get that right ego state in the executive of your brain, you can just simply stand the way you would stand and then develop the shopping list. I am feeling really connected to my people. People enjoy talking to me. I share an interest with them. I'm a natural people person. I build rapport. I inspire them to feel good about what they're doing and open communication. So if you just sort of say a bunch of those things out loud while standing and breathing as though it's
say it as though you believe it.
Yeah. What'll happen is you'll be immediately in the right zone. So there was that.
To which I would add. I would add one thing, Chris.
You want to add to that?
Well, I'm just going to say the as-if frame. The as-if frame is ask you, how would I stand, move, speak if I was extremely confident, extremely affirming of the other people around me, extremely empowering of others? How would I do it? And then just step into it. We don't say fake it till you make it. We say fake it till you become it. And you can do this in many areas of life. You can't do it with brain surgery or flying an airplane, but you can do it with lots of other areas. And I did this years ago, 2005. Knew nothing about wine, didn't drink wine, didn't drink at all back then. Bought a wine encyclopedia, Wine for Dummies, read it, and started posting as though I was a wine expert in Toronto. City Bites magazine called me one of the top 9 in wine in Canada. I got invited to host the Ontario Wine Awards in character. People started sending me cases of Burgundy and Bordeaux. I jumped in at the top and figured it out when I got there. Now, some things you can do that with, but act as if you already have that skill and notice how everything changes.
Yeah.
Wow. I actually practiced that myself. I've been saying lately, act like the person you want to become to motivate myself to go to the gym in the mornings. It hasn't been working, but that's on me and my coffee machine. But anyways, that's a great point.
Well, you can leverage this. Will apply well to corporate world, I think, as well as going to the gym. That we call it the baby steps principle. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? Yeah, you get there one bite at a time. So you look for the smallest little noticeable change that you can make. So if somebody's looking to motivate themselves to go to the gym in the morning, maybe instead you start with, I just do 5 push-ups or whatever on my floor. And when I get to the sufficient level of improvement, okay, then it becomes just going to the gym. So, or it's just, I pack my gym clothes and I put them in my gym bag. And that's what I do in the morning. That could be the little incremental step. I drive to the gym, and if I don't feel like it, I don't do it. Or I go there for 5 minutes, and if I'm not feeling it, I leave. Whatever the incremental steps work at for you. And I think the same thing can be the process in a work environment. So what is the one little change that we can make that's ridiculously trivial in terms of effort, but can actually give us a result, and start
then
doing
maintain
that.
the chain.
Maintain the chain, which was a Jerry Seinfeld line, right? Maintain the chain. So he would write comedy every single day, even if it sucked. Just get in the habit of spending a few minutes doing it, never skipping a day. So maintain that chain of little baby steps. Another really useful concept doesn't come from hypnosis, but we learned this from James Clear's book, Atomic Habits, the idea of habit stacking. So if you need people to make a small change, what can you tack it onto that you already do? Simple example was actually within about the last year or so, Mike, you and I both started taking creatine as a supplement, which has a lot of health benefits. Well, to remember to do it, it would be easier to just add it to the coffee that I'm already having in the morning. Simple thing to just habit stack going, well, I already have my coffee with my cream. All I got to do is grab a scoop of this stuff, do it. So what can you do in the workplace, or what can you inspire people to do or teach your people to do in the workplace where they're already doing a thing, it's already unconscious, and you just bolt on another little habit to it.
Yeah. In my case, I'm a thyroid patient, so I have to take thyroxine every day for 30 years. So it's just thyroxine. Oh yeah, creatine, right to it. So stacking those two together, something that's already happening.
There's one other thing I want to make sure we leave you guys with, and that is the idea of language for you versus we. And the way to think about this is, imagine you're giving somebody some sort of constructive criticism. You are always late, right? It's important that you show up on time. It's important that you do your SIFI checks. That feels combative. And that usually comes along with body language where you're opposing each other. If we're sitting on opposite sides of the table, we are like confrontational. So it's much better body language aligned to people. And when you're giving them feedback on something that you want to change, use we language. We find that it's so much more effective, isn't it, when we X, hence the feedback. So it's
no table in between, no barrier.
We're a team. We're positioned beside each other, right? And you can use that as a metaphor, or you can actually do it if you're in person. It's hard to do over Zoom. But using we language when you're offering some sort of suggested change. Now, if you want to, on the opposite side of the coin, let's say you want to commend somebody for a job well done. That's great. You can say, hey, I really appreciate how you XYZ, whatever the thing is, because people will love that you're calling out them. They like to get the recognition when it's positive, but they don't want to be told, you need to fall into line. You need to do a better job. You need to show up on time, that kind of stuff.
Interesting. That is a really good takeaway, actually. And I think I do that even in arguments with friends or partners. It's always, you did this instead of we should be working on this. But no, that's amazing. Scott, any final takeaways?
I think it's just a fascinating discussion. I know we're probably at the end of our time. This could be a 2-hour podcast, and maybe it should. But I think that I always try to think with the lens of leadership and what that influence model looks like. What are some methodologies that I should consider? So I've learned a lot, today, and maybe some subtle changes that I even need to consider, and how I lead. So nope, mine's clear. I just want to ask more questions, and maybe we will. So
I know. I'm also hypnotized. I can talk to you guys forever. But anybody wants to learn more about what Mike and Chris offer, visit MikeMandelHypnosis.com. Check out their podcast, The Brain Software. It's available wherever you listen. And Mike, Chris, thank you again so much for joining us today. It was a very eye-opening conversation. We would love to have you back again. And like I said, I could just keep talking to you forever. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. A pleasure indeed.
All right. Thanks, guys.